What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to talk about how you can simplify your spare shooting. You know, a lot of people get worked up about spares, thinking they're really difficult. Really, honestly, they're not, as long as you use a method similar to the one I'm going to show you today. Okay guys, so let's talk about spare shooting and how we can improve our spare shooting. Really, spare shooting is not nearly as hard as most people make it. The first thing I recommend is whether you're a high rev or a low rev player or a one-handed player or a two-handed player, you always need to have a ball that you know for sure is not going to hook very much and use that as your spare ball. For me, as a two-hander with a high rev rate and I would say medium to medium high ball speed, I know that I can't make a reactive ball or even a urethane ball go straight down the lane and have zero hook to it. So for me, it's always going to be a plastic ball. Plastic has the least amount of hook to it, it skids the furthest down the lane, it goes the straightest. For a thumb-in player, they always have that option of being able to take their hand basically and weaken it so much that the ball hardly has any revolutions to it and is going to go dead straight no matter what. That's why you see a lot of the professionals who use their thumb use one of their strike balls as their spare ball. One player who's really good at that is Norm Duke. He's always been, as far as I'm concerned, one of the better PBA pros who is able to do anything he wants with his release, no matter what ball he has in his hand. But anyway, so I recommend getting a ball that you know is not going to do much on the lane and using that as your spare ball. To be honest, I really recommend a plastic spare ball, but you can use a hook ball if you're more comfortable doing that. Just make sure that ball is going dead straight. We'll walk up here on the approach. And as everybody knows in bowling, you've got the arrows which are on the first quarter of the lane, or should I say the first third of the lane. And those arrows are primarily there for visual targeting. Looking at one of the arrows, standing in a certain spot on the approach, hitting that target will get your ball to go in a certain spot. In order to simplify our spare shooting, we're going to always use the middle arrow as our visual target reference. We aren't going to change that no matter what pin we're shooting at. All we're going to be doing is moving our feet to change the angle that we're launching the ball at to get it to go to the proper area down lane to pick up a certain spare. So I'm going to kind of show you what I do. There's all kinds of spare shooting systems out there that you can read about. 369, Norm Duke has a special one that he uses. Pretty much every bowler is unique in that regard as far as what they use as a spare shooting system. I'm pretty unique myself. I have what I call a zone spare shooting system, but I'm not going to try and explain that to you now. I'm going to show you the basics of how that system works. Okay, so to put this into practice, I'm going to stand where I usually do to pick up my 10 pin. For me, in this particular bowling alley, that is 3 dots left of center. Aiming at middle arrow, I know that the ball is definitely going to go and cover the 6 pin or the 10 pin. In most cases, both. Particular shot, I was just a little bit left of where I should have been. I was actually 21 at the arrows, not 20, but the ball still went to where I needed it to cover that 6 pin or that 10 pin. In that case, it covered both of them. And in fact, I chopped one over and I got the 7 pin out as well. And this raises another point about spare shooting. Throwing a cross lane at single pin spares is really the best thing you can do to increase your spare percentage. It gives you more room for error. As you saw there in that shot, I missed a little left, but the ball still continued to the right to cover that pin. If I was standing more behind the pin I wanted to shoot, let's say the 10 pin or the 6 pin, and trying to throw straight at it from behind the pin, and let's say I missed a little right, well, chances are it would have went in the gutter. If I would have tugged a little bit, usually that means it's going to miss left of where I want that ball to actually be. So again, to increase your spare shooting, try to throw a cross lane at any single pin spare that you leave, whether that's a head pin, a 5 pin, a 4 pin, 10 pin, 7 pin, pretty much anything in the entire rack, as long as it's a single pin spare. All right, so let's move on. I'm going to move 1 dot to the right with my feet. I'm going to aim at middle arrow, of course. And for me, this is what I usually do to shoot like a 3 pin single pin spare, a 310 baby split, a 6 pin single pin spare, or even a 9 pin single pin spare. great shot. As you can see, one more dot to the right with my feet, middle arrow is my target. The ball would have covered the 3 pin if it had been there by itself, the 6 pin as well, and as well as the 9 pin. So we're going to move one more dot to the right again. Now at this point, I'm going to be more projecting the ball dead straight up the lane. This would be for pins like the head pin, the 2 pin, and the 5 pin. Okay, so as you can see, that was a great shot. The ball went straight over middle arrow, straight down the lane, and covered the head pin, covered the 2 pin, and the 5 pin. Now, obviously, I'm not throwing a cross lane at those pins. In order to do that, I would have to actually change my visual target with where my feet are at. But, you know, in this particular case, I'm not overly concerned about it. In most situations you find yourself in, whether it's on a sport shot or a house shot, you're actually going to be throwing the ball in the zone of the lane where there's the most oil. So I'm not overly concerned about the ball finding any friction and really hooking too much at all. All right, we're going to move again. I'm going to move to the middle dot on the approach. And this dot is one that I use when I'm usually shooting like a 4 pin, an 8 pin, sometimes the 2 pin if there's a lot of friction on the lane, something like that. Okay, so I threw a great shot there, and as you can see, middle arrow, standing with my left foot on the middle dot. The ball went straight towards where the 4 pin would have covered the 8 pin. And if there was a little higher volume on the lane, it probably would have made it all the way to the 7 pin. Now, speaking of the 7 pin, to move on to that, I usually don't go any further than either middle dot or just right at middle dot on the approach when I'm using the middle arrow as my target. If I do, I have a tendency to tug the ball and pull it into the left gutter. So I'm going to go basically split the difference between the middle dot and the dot to the right of middle dot, which in board numbers, that's going to be 15 and 20. So I'm going to be standing probably left toe on 18, aiming middle arrow, and the ball should project itself straight towards the 7 pin. Okay guys, so that is what I do to increase my spare percentage. Number 1, the key is always throw a cross lane at your single pin spares. Number 2, use a ball that you know is going to not do hardly anything on the lane, whether that's a plastic spare ball or just a ball in your arsenal that you know when you throw it, it's going to go mostly straight. And obviously number 3, make sure when you release that ball, you're not rotating it at all. You're trying to stay behind the ball. Obviously, if you're throwing plastic, that does give you a little bit of miss room in your release, because plastic is the hardest material that we currently have as far as bowling balls are concerned. So if it encounters friction with a little bit of rotation, it's not going to hook a ton, especially if you have a little bit faster ball speed. Now just keep in mind, just because these are the dots that I use to get the ball to go in those particular spots does not mean that that's going to work 100% for you. You're going to have to play with this a little bit. You're probably going to have to move your feet slightly because not everybody's physical game is going to be 100% like mine or even similar to mine. You're going to have to make minor tweaks to this by moving your feet a little bit more, maybe a little bit less to get that ball projected in the proper area. But the theory behind it should remain true, whereas you can use the same target at the arrows and just move your feet to align with that target to get the ball to go across lane at any spare that you want to cover. Now, before I end the video today, there is one thing that I want to mention as far as what you can do when you come out to practice to help you get better at spare shooting. Obviously, practice this method as much as you can, but you can also do what's called playing low ball. Now, the whole intention of playing a low ball game is to get the lowest score possible. Obviously, the way you do that is by hitting 1 pin each throw. If you happen to throw the ball in the gutter, that actually counts as a strike. If you get a spare, that's just a spare. And obviously, if you accidentally throw a really bad shot and somehow get a strike when you're trying to get a single pin, that counts as a strike. So that's how you score yourself with low ball. And you can really practice this cross-lane shooting method. What I do when I come out to practice is I always spend at least a half hour, that's usually 1 to 2 games, of just practicing spares. 7 pin, 10 pin, 7 pin, 10 pin, over and over and over. And what I'm really doing is focusing on being accurate with my release, staying straight up the back of the ball, hitting my line as best as I can to try and pick up just that 1 pin each and every shot. Anyway guys, thanks for watching the video today. Leave a like below if you liked the video, and of course hit that subscribe button for me because it does help me out a ton. I really hope that this spare shooting method is something that you can use to improve your game. I'll see you guys in the next one.